Just like the variety of plants and life on our native grasslands, South Dakota is filled with diverse partners playing a role in supporting those grasslands. Each episode, Partners on the Prairie will introduce you to those impacting South Dakota's grasslands. I'm your host, Laura Kaler, Director of the South Dakota Grasslands Initiative, a collaborative network of diverse partners who support grasslands as a means of retaining prairie ecosystems, both native and restored, while sustaining rural economies and healthy communities. Since the 1970s, over half the grassland bird population has been lost. A partner who is focused on the populations of grassland birds, as well as other species, is the Audubon Society. Josh Lefers with the Audubon Great Plains, which has a mission to protect birds and the places that they need today and tomorrow. In South Dakota, much of his work focuses on grassland habitats. Today, he's here to share with us about Audubon Great Plains and programs to support grassland bird habitats. Thanks, Josh, for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Laura.
In South Dakota, what are some of the types of birds that Audubon focuses their efforts on?
So South Dakota is firmly a prairie state, right? Certainly we've got the Black Hills, we've got the Missouri River, we've got all the wetlands in the prairie pothole region. But when we look at the overall ecology, it's prairie, vast majority prairie. And so when we are working, a lot of times what we're thinking about are those birds that rely on grasslands for at least a portion of their life cycle. We have birds that breed here, nest here, and then migrate to the south. We have birds that migrate through the grasslands on their way to their breeding grounds and wintering grounds. And then we actually do have birds that winter here that actually breed up in the Arctic tundra. And so that suite of birds that rely on the prairie for some portion of their life cycle is really what we're most focused on here in the state. And to a lesser extent, some of the birds that are unique to the Black Hills or that sort of thing. But we've so far focused our programs on grasslands.
Specifically, what are some of the critical or key species that you focus on here?
Yeah, so we have about a dozen species that we list as our indicator species for different programs that we look for specifically when we're out monitoring. And those birds are it could be something as readily recognizable as the Western meadowlark. Western meadowlarks are something that, just about everyone knows what a meadowlark is. They've got they're big, they sit out on their fence posts, and they've got very loud and recognizable songs. But the reality on the Western meadowlark is their populations have dropped by almost half over the last 50 years. And so even a relatively common bird like the Western meadowlark has seen significant population declines just in the recent memory. Other birds we look at are birds that have even greater declines than that. Something like a Sprague's pipit, which is a small brown bird. We call them LBBs, little brown birds. That's very secretive. It really nests mostly in kind of north central, northwest South Dakota, and then up into North Dakota, and predominantly walks through grassland vegetation. So it's not even that common to find it, but has some pretty unique habits, and especially like the breeding calls, the breeding rituals are pretty unique. One that I'm really fond of is the chestnut-collared longspur. A lot of our grassland birds have a really light underbelly, but a chestnut-collared longspur has a black belly and chest. And so they're pretty recognizable that way. Even when they fly over, it's just like completely black. And then the back is still brown. And they have a little bit of chestnut-colored brown on the back of their neck. Hence the chestnut-collared longspur. And I really enjoy anytime I run into that bird. We also look at some of our larger game birds like sharp-tailed grouse and prairie chickens. Those populations are significantly reduced from historically, and even their range is much smaller than it was 100 years ago. And we definitely have interest in keeping those birds on the landscape for the ecological value that they bring and the niche that they fill, as well as just the economic value that they bring into the state in that way. And then like for wetland side too, we have the northern pintail as a priority bird species for us. That's a dabbling duck that has seen kind of bucked the trends of higher waterfowl population and is now, much less common than it was back in the 70s. And some of that, at least, is attributable to just the loss of small, temporary, and seasonal wetlands. So it's a pretty broad group of birds, and we try to use. I think we've done that intentionally to help us better track our impacts over time in the variety, the wide variety of habitats that we have here in the state. And we go all the way from tall grass prairie to short grass prairie, and even starting to get into that sage ecosystem just within this state. And so getting those kind of indicator species allows us to think more about how any management that we implement is impacting the broader bird community.
So everyone listening to this podcast may have a different favorite species, and with that, the reason that they value grassland birds. What are some of the different values that people might have?
Well, one of the things I love about birds and love about working for the Audubon Society is the way that birds connect people. And that's both from just a love of birds and the love of watching birds. Bird watching is the second most popular outdoor activity in the United States behind gardening. The National Audubon Society is the largest conservation, wildlife-centric conservation organization in North America, with 1.2 million members. So people really love birds, but it also connects us ecologically or geographically. A bird that we see today, well, right now it's mid-December, and so was out over the weekend and saw some western meadowlarks. Well, the science tells us that the western meadowlarks that are here in the winter, they actually come from the prairie provinces of Canada, Saskatchewan and Alberta and such. And the western meadowlarks that we see here in the summer, they actually winter in the southern plains, Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. And so, birds that we see now, are going to move somewhere else, and someone else is going to enjoy the same bird at a different time of the year. But also, as you think of something like waterfowl or something that does a long range migration, sandhill cranes is a good example. Sandhill cranes, we may see them here today and they'll be in Saskatchewan tomorrow, or in the fall, they'll be in Texas tomorrow. So they move long distances, and that's really fascinating and really neat to think about. But when we talk about value, a lot of people right away go to economic value, and certainly there's economic value that comes from outdoor recreation, enjoying wildlife. The most obvious one in South Dakota is pheasant hunting. Pheasants are an introduced species, so it's not a species that we do a whole lot of work on, but certainly the pheasant hunting or hunting in general, because duck hunting or grouse hunting or even mourning dove hunting does bring a lot of economic activity into the state. And so from that standpoint, thinking about the economic activity, and individual operations have used that opportunity to add a revenue stream to their operations through hunting or just general outdoor recreation. Come enjoy the solitude and listen to the diversity of birds that we've got on our ranch. Birds also do serve a ecological role as pest control. That's something we don't think about a lot, but a lot of birds will eat insects, and whether that's taking the flies off of your livestock, at least keeping them in check. I've done it on my place. I know other people have, where you'll encourage something like swallows to be around so that they can eat the flies off your livestock, which is a pretty cool opportunity. Other birds will focus in on like juvenile grasshoppers, particularly. And when you think about, there are some birds that actually will respond to larger number of grasshoppers, in an area and move in large numbers to actually take advantage of that food resource. That doesn't mean they get all of them, but they certainly, without the birds, there would be even more of those insect pests, and so they do serve that function as well, which is something I think we often overlook when it comes to just economic value of having healthy bird populations out there.
And that connects to one of the first programs that I heard about with Audubon is from a rancher who is using these mindful practices in their grazing and land management to encourage healthy bird populations, recognizing the importance for that whole ecosystem balance and how it benefits their cattle. Can you describe a little bit more about that program that Audubon does to help support the ranchers who are using those practices?
Sure. Audubon Conservation Ranching is the program name. So Audubon Conservation Ranching is built around this idea that a producer who provides thoughtful care to the ecology of a place through their practices and should be rewarded and should have positive standing in the marketplace. And this was an idea that was actually it's not a new idea, right? Aldo Leopold was talking about this back in the 1940s. He actually wrote an article in Audubon magazine at that time specifically about dairies in Wisconsin. But people are even familiar with it today. There's such a thing as, Rainforest Alliance certified coffee, where coffee is produced in a way that's friendly to the ecology as well as just the local biodiversity. There's such a thing as bird-friendly maple syrup, and I could, there's other things out there that are based on working with the local ecology. And so Audubon said, why not for grasslands? Grasslands are one of the most imperiled ecosystems, certainly in North America, but even in the world. Less than 1% of the tallgrass prairie in the United States remains. And even that which does remain is typically, much of it is low functioning. It doesn't have as much diversity. It's not managed in a way that's really promoting that really high diversity and all of those ecological benefits. And so it comes back to, well, why not grasslands? How can we provide an ecological certification for grasslands? And grasslands are widely used for livestock production. And ultimately, a lot of the products that come off grasslands that are friendly to the ecology are meat products from those livestock, whether that be beef or bison or lamb. And so about 7 years ago, a group from Audubon, well, it was probably closer to 10 years ago, they started thinking about this, making some plans, and then I think we certified the first ranch about 8 years ago. And so Audubon Conservation Ranching is built around what I look at as kind of three pillars. The first is management. So a ranch that wants to participate, they're going to meet with an Audubon range ecologist to look at current management and how it's working for birds and biodiversity. And then the range ecologist will provide, I guess, some additional feedback for ways to improve management, and then back that up with monitoring as any changes are made. I will say that changes are certainly a voluntary, this is a completely voluntary program, but as changes are implemented or then we back that up with monitoring. Through the monitoring, we can compare bird populations on that ranch to other ranches within the same, what's known as an ecoregion. So a region with the same ecology should have the same bird species and populations. And then through a product from our science team at the Audubon Society, we develop a bird friendliness index for an individual ranch to determine whether that ranch is as friendly as the average, more friendly than the average, less friendly than the average. On average, we're seeing about 20% more friendly, more birds as it is for ranches that are enrolled in the program versus the regional average. And it does vary. We've seen ranches that are 40, 60, 80% more friendly than the average, but it really depends, I guess, on the ranch and kind of where they are in their journey as well. So that's the monitoring. So management is one. We work with a producer to look at management. Second is monitoring. And the third is that marketing piece that you spoke about and that I was also speaking about. once a ranch is doing the management, they can apply to be certified. The certification is done by a third party. Food Alliance is the company that does the certification. And once a ranch is certified, any products that come from that ranch are eligible to carry the seal that says grazed on Audubon certified bird-friendly land. And we have some national marketing and communication staff that works typically with meat companies, and a lot of them are more niche meat companies. We have ranch specific meat companies, right? We have ranches that have their own direct market business. And so our staff will work to roll out communications, marketing materials to kind of promote that. Again, with the ultimate goal of bringing back real value, right? Dollars and cents to the ranch for implementing these conservation actions for the benefit of birds. Because again, we know people like birds. We know people want to participate. And if there are all these other certifications in the marketplace for other ecologies, rainforests and such, why not grasslands? And so that's something that we've been working on for several years. And we've seen some good successes and we've seen some non-starters, but we're committed and we keep on working towards it.
So for landowners wanting to develop their property to be more bird friendly, what are some programs that Audubon offers?
Sure. So I mentioned Audubon Conservation Ranching. We've got 5 of them here in Audubon Great Plains, which is North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska. I mentioned Audubon Conservation Program. Second one is not available or not in South Dakota, and that is Audubon does own some land in both North Dakota and Nebraska. In Nebraska, it's really centered around visitor participation, and they have 2 centers down there that see tens of thousands of visitors annually. In North Dakota, we own a couple of properties that were gifted to us back in the 80s. And so those properties are actually used as, I would say, like test sites for management. So we'll implement management intensive grazing or prescribed fire or woody species removal. And then the ideal would be that we'd disseminate that information into the community and host field days. And we've done that on a variety of occasions in North Dakota. And also it is a place where people can go out and, look at birds, go bird watching. They're open to the public for that type of outdoor recreation. So there's that one. One of them we have in North Dakota is the Conservation Forage Program. It's really built around this idea. When you look at grassland restoration, historically, there's been kind of a two streets you could follow. One of them is the CRP path, which is yearly payment, but it's a set aside program. So you get the grassland established, and you can spray weeds and you can hunt it, but that's about it. The other path is if you really wanted to establish it for working lands for grazing or haying, you could get some cost share for the seed, maybe the seeding costs, but essentially you were left without income while that seed established. So Conservation Forage Program tries to bridge that gap by providing 3 to 5 years of establishment payments. So cost share of the seed provides support for seed and seeding, getting the seed in the ground, and then a couple of years of payments we've been using state listed cropland rental rate prices to establish those establishment payments. And in North Dakota, we've been doing 3 years. That's just kind of how it's set. So you'll get a payment for those 3 years while it establishes on a 10-year contract. So you get 3 years of payments. And then after that, the landowner can graze it, hay it, however they want to incorporate into their working land system for the benefit of their operation. We're actually working pretty extensively with Ducks Unlimited at this point. They had an RCPP where they rolled this out once and they had good response. And so they just received another regional conservation partnership program funding from the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and we're going to work with them pretty extensively to roll this out in South Dakota. We've been doing this in North Dakota. Really excited to bring it to South Dakota with Ducks Unlimited, and they'll be kind of leading that effort, but we're going to be supporting in any way that we can. They have a little bit more flexibility on those establishment payments from 1 to 5 years. We did just 3 years in North Dakota, but very excited to see how that works in South Dakota. Those are the first three. The two other ones that we do implement here in South Dakota, we have what's known as our Toolbox program. So when we think about Toolbox, you think of all the tools you may use to manage your grasslands, pastures, prairies, and we put all those tools in the toolbox. And so as a standard financial assistance, something you would think of through any number of conservation organizations, we support grazing system development through, financially supporting fence and water infrastructure to keep those grasslands green side up and on the landscape. We've supported prescribed fire, mechanical removal of invasive woody vegetation, so that if you've got cedar trees or Russian olive trees that are into a place that you don't want them, providing that support to remove them. We've supported just standard kind of grassland restorations through purchasing, supporting the seed, I guess, for grassland restorations. But that all kind of fits within that Toolbox program. We've done a number of things there. The final one is we've worked pretty extensively with Fish and Wildlife Service, especially around sandhill cranes. So sandhill cranes stage, most of the population stages on the Platte River in the spring on their way north. But in response to a number of changes in the agriculture community down there, about a third of those cranes now leave the Platte River early and fly and actually stage here in eastern South Dakota, roughly centered around kind of the Woolsey Redfield area along 281 there. And then, it may be as far north as Aberdeen, as far south as maybe I-90. And so we get about a third of the sandhill cranes that are now utilizing these unique kind of shallow drainages that come off the Missouri Coteau there. And we've worked with Fish and Wildlife Service to prioritize funding to work with landowners that are wanting to protect those areas with easements. And so that program has been really successful. We've secured some additional funding in the past for that. Right now, predominantly it's around just kind of science support and providing people to people to help move those projects forward as we are able. So those are our 5 programs in the state, or 3 in the state, but 5 in the Great Plains that we've participated in.
And it sounds like a lot of that is done through partnerships. Actually, in episode 4 of this podcast series, Bruce spoke on the RCPP that you addressed as well. What about not just the on-the-ground work, but the education side of teaching people about birds? What are some partnerships that you've engaged in for education?
Yeah, so Audubon, we've hosted a few educational events. We certainly partner with a number of other organizations in the state to bring educational events. Maybe the most recent ones that Audubon hosted ourselves in partnership. We worked with the Grassland Coalition to do this, but we had Dallas Mount with Ranching for Profit come out and do a couple of one-day workshops on ranches in western South Dakota, where they talked about the economic business of ranching in the morning and ways to improve profit on a ranch. And then they go out to a ranch in the afternoon to talk about it on the ground. So it was about a year and a half ago, I think, that we had Dallas come out to do that. We worked pretty extensively with the Grassland Coalition on their educational events, both the grazing schools and prescribed fire schools. We try to participate as much as we are able. I take the time every year with the prescribed fire school to be there, and also with the Eastern Grazing School. But I would also say, and so partnerships, we're pretty much always working in partnerships. The thing I would add to that is I think we're always interested in hearing what producers want to hear. Who would they like to hear from? Is there a speaker? Is there a topic that they'd um, like to hear more about? And so we've got funding for bringing in speakers and doing those types of workshops. And if someone's got an idea, they're welcome to reach out to me and say, "Hey, I'd like to hear about this." And I'll probably want to know how it relates to birds because that's the lens through which we view our conservation work. But always interested in hearing more about what people want to hear. It does me no good to bring in someone who wants to talk about birds all day and I get no one to show up for the workshop. I'd rather get someone in that's ready to talk about managing grasslands and healthy habitat and get individuals who really want to hear what's going on there.
If someone's listening to this podcast right now and they have an idea of brewing for you on something that they'd like to see you bring in or a way that you guys could collaborate, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Best way to get a hold of me is just through email at this point. As long as I'm not traveling, I'm usually pretty quick to get back to you. And so my email is just my name, Joshua Lefers. So just joshua.lefers@audubon.org.
What are some ways that partners listening can support the work that you're doing in South Dakota?
Maybe the biggest thing I can think of offhand is when I guess professionals are out working with producers and a producer's talking about just the birds that they have and they see that as a real value. Or even if they don't, just having those individuals with other organizations keep birds as a conservation value when they are talking with producers. And, we've got programs. So if there's something that we can support, and I guess I would also add to that, I think we're also always interested in hearing about new ways to serve producers. I am particularly interested in novel ideas that we can use to help keep grass green side up and make grasslands more diverse and all that sort of thing. I'd like to hear more ideas and see how we can make some of the really good ideas come to fruition.
And it is great to have partners like you bringing in different perspectives to those partnerships. You providing the ideas of, how can this benefit native birds as well as the landowner. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you to our listeners for taking the time to learn more about your partner with Audubon. We encourage you to visit our website, sdgrassinitiative.org/resources, to find other podcasts from our other grassland partners. Thanks.
Conservation forage program is one of those, right? A couple of years ago, something really didn't exist to kind of bridge that gap for someone who wanted a working lands type grassland, and they would just basically had to seed it and take the loss of income for a couple of years. And it took a little bit of doing, but over 5 years here, we've proved out the model and it's been pretty successful. And so I think we're just really interested in continuing to look for those opportunities to improve the delivery of conservation in South Dakota and the Great Plains.
Any other thoughts on the Audubon's work?
Oh, no, nothing right now. I guess if anyone wants to talk more about it, they're welcome to reach out. I'm happy to talk about. I talk more about grasslands and ecology. If you want to talk about birds, I can talk about birds. I know birds, but I'm certainly more of a grassland guy than I am a bird guy. But I don't know that I have a whole lot more to add.